Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Football Podcast. Ben Steiner alongside Alex Gongiruzik for this one. A bit of a second episode this week. Of course, we had all our Canadian men's national team and Canadian women's national team chat on the last show. That came out yesterday. But we're going to talk everything else Canadian soccer on today's show, including the domestic leagues, the club game, the Canadian Championship, and of course, Canadians abroad, where we'll talk about some of those players that were called up to the national team. But Alex, you made the trek out to Langley last night, a little bit busier on a weekday to get to Vancouver FC games from the west side of Vancouver than on a weekend.
Yeah, always quite the adventure, I guess you can say, to get out of Langley on midweek. I guess if you've grown up in the Vancouver area, you ever had to play less so soccer since that was always Saturday, Sunday, but especially if you had to play sports like hockey that would have like Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday games, the pain, I guess, of playing a Langley team at 7 o'clock or, playing Abbotsford at 6. Some of those scheduling would always be pretty horrific, but it's at least it was nice. There's no lightning, there's no rain, and can enjoy riding on the highway with the windows down. So that was, I guess, the one plus.
Yeah, a little bit different than the weekend game where I think it's still a tent at Vancouver FC's Willoughby Community Park. And there was a rare rain delay for the CPL and any game in BC because usually you just play through that. But it was a full-on thunderstorm delay, and I can't imagine that was too enjoyable for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you're used to seeing a lot. Like I know Cavalry's had a few because there's always, a little more lightning in Alberta, definitely out east as well. There's been a few, but Vancouver doesn't get lightning very often. And even when it does, it seems to be like in the middle of the night for whatever reason. It's rare that you get like midday lightning. So on one hand, it was kind of surreal because you're just seeing, gray skies, lightning in the distance, kind of like, dystopian. And on the other hand, like the fact that the game gets delayed, it was a bit jarring because that's definitely not a typical occurrence in Vancouver soccer, although as someone astutely pointed out to me, I mean, that is part of the Vancouver Whitecaps lore for not good reasons. That famed Lightning game they were winning Can Champ, they had to wipe it clean completely, and that obviously ended up losing. Thankfully, the protocols are a bit better this time around, and if that situation were to occur, as we saw in this game, it's just a delay, and back to business as usual.
Yeah, and I guess being in a fully aluminum stadium probably isn't the place you want to be during a lightning storm either. So probably good that they called that one off, considering that entire stadium is basically a lightning rod. But we'll jump into the Canadian Championship quarterfinal week. We got 3 of the matches. Of course, we're still waiting on York United against Atletico Ottawa in their first leg. But some big results. Forge upsetting CF Montreal once again. 1-0 in their first leg. 2-2 between Valour and the Whitecaps. A good showing by Valour in that one, and probably some opportunities the Whitecaps got, and they would have hoped they could finish. And then Vancouver FC 1-1 against Cavalry, the match, of course, last night that you were out at. But your big takeaways from this round of the Canadian Championship, I think all eyes have to go probably to that Valour performance against the top team in the MLS Western Conference.
Yeah, I guess in terms of shock factor, it was definitely that one. I think it was a general expectation that, the Whitecaps, given what they've done this year, would just kind of run over Valour, even if they put out a B team or some equivalent. And, Jesper Sorensen, as expected, puts out a heavily rotated team. I think for what it's worth, it's not a bad result for the Whitecaps. I think that's lost in all this in the sense that they did rotate their squad. They come out with a positive road result at the end of the day. As you've learned, a lot of these two-legged ties, they're not easy. They're not easy to go to a new stadium midweek, rotate your squad. On the flip side, credit to Valour for making it a lot more uncomfortable. Like, had the Whitecaps come out with a 2-0 result, I think that's what everyone was expecting. But Valour didn't just deny them of that, but they played probably one of their best games in years. It's generally been a while since they've played to that level. They played up to their opposition. They made things uncomfortable, scored, 2 great goals, one off set piece, one a first-time finish. That was of top class. I think Valour really put a good account of themselves in. And look, it's going to be tough for them to get a result in leg 2. But the fact that they're heading to a leg 2, thinking, all right, you have a chance. And hey, no away goals. This actually benefits Valour because had the Whitecaps had 2 away goals, I think this tie would have been kind of dead and buried already. The fact that it's basically a fresh game, Valour will take that. Otherwise, that was the big surprise because, look, I think Forge Montreal on one hand, well, like you mentioned, it's still technically an upset. Is it really? Is it really an upset when they beat them last year when, they looked so dominant in this game? Like, this is a very even matchup. And right now, if anything, based on confidence, based on form, Forge kind of has the edge, and I think they showed that. If anything, 1-0 seemed to flatter Montreal, which is a sign of where this battle is trended. Whereas maybe 2-3 years ago, Montreal was winning this easily in 22 and 23. Now, Forge seems to be the aggressor, and they certainly played like it.
Yeah, I think more of the status in that matchup probably goes to the fact that CF Montreal is not a very good soccer team this year. Like they've got some bright spots in the play of, you mentioned Luca Petrasso and Nathan Saliba, but the rest of the team has not been very good. They've been a little bit better since they've gotten Vrioni back, but they're just not a very strong soccer team, and Forge gets up for these type of matches. They know the importance of the Canadian Championship and being able to prove themselves against a team like Montreal. They're familiar with Montreal at this point. Of course, Montreal has also gone through a bunch of managerial shifts, so it's a little bit different each time, but they get up for this match, and you can see that Forge knows how to win these type of games, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them take care of business in the second leg either. Valour, I was, a little bit shocked by, but I also don't think the Whitecaps are necessarily pissed off about this result. Jesper Sorensen wasn't so happy about it in his press conference, nor was Ali Ahmed. The goal from Ali Ahmed, the second one to tie it 2-2, was outstanding, a turn that you don't really see very often. But I don't think the Whitecaps are necessarily frustrated with this. Yes, they would have liked the advantage, but they got through in terms of this game. Like they're fine in terms of going into a next game. They rotated their squad. They can go into the next game. They can play, their top players and probably get past Valour. So I don't think it's much of a concern for the Whitecaps, but definitely a good moment for Valour. The Vancouver Cavalry 1-1 feels like we've seen that matchup, 50 times over, and definitely not anything to write home in that one. But a question from Jeff Salisbury: if that Valour showed up week in, week out, they'd be a top half club and in the playoffs. Begs the question, why doesn't that Valour show up week in, week out?
I think that's again the $1 million question, because agreed. If Valour plays anything like that, that's the sort of level they have in their squad. And I think it's interesting because they did make some good recruitment, over this off season, and they kind of, for once, what's something they've struggled with is continuity, and they got some continuity. Someone like Temi Antonoglu has a phenomenal 2024 season. You worry that he leaves. No, he sticks around. They add the likes of Zachary Fernandez. They had some other interesting pieces like a Chris Twardek, a couple of the Portuguese internationals. They built, they added instead of just, bleeding players. Rocco Romeo, another one they added, who had a fantastic game against the Whitecaps. But for whatever reason, the big thing with this Valour side has just been consistency. That's kind of been the story of their last 3 years. Like overall, Valour, they're constantly in the mix for the playoffs. They give big teams a fight. Like their record against Forge, for example, is incredible. Like Forge genuinely gets more trouble with Valour than they do some of the other, CPL teams, because Valour plays them so well. But then, it comes the next week, they just can't maintain consistency. So I think that's the big one for them, is just finding this level and maintaining it week after week, because they have that in their locker, that they have a talented roster. Like Zachary Fernandez was incredible in this game against the Whitecaps, just absolutely dominated that right flank. He is a very good addition. They've got good additions across their roster. They got a decent midfield. Their back line, if they can build off this, there were some good signs from them against a dangerous Whitecaps attack. They got the attack. The attack's been the one reliable constant, in the sense that like they've got pieces. If anything, it's just been a lack of movement, a lack of execution in these games. So if Valour just needs to find a way to take this and make it a habit, instead of just being something you see in fleeting moments or every few months.
I think there's a lot of players on that Valour team as well that haven't gotten an opportunity like this. This was the first time that Valour was playing an MLS team in the Canadian Championship. You look at what that's done for Cavalry over the years. They've paid so much attention to those games against the Vancouver Whitecaps. They got that big win in 2019, and that kind of pushed them on to that 2019 success. And then, of course, they played the Whitecaps very competitively last year, falling in 2 legs. But I think Valour needed that kind of shot in the arm of playing an MLS team and playing them well, and that can motivate a lot of players. So I think when you take into the talent that they have and you add that motivation of playing not just an MLS team, but one of the best MLS teams this season, I think that can make a big difference for a team that probably footballing wise doesn't quite measure up to the Whitecaps when those teams are at full strength, but that can be the difference, especially a rested Whitecaps team or a rotated Whitecaps team and a Valour team that really hasn't had a bigger game necessarily in their history than that one. And it certainly paid off for them.
Yeah, well, I mean, they have played an MLS team. They played the Whitecaps in 2022, but as I mentioned, with the continuity year over year, if you look at that roster from the Valor 22, there's just, it's guys like Sean Rea was on that team, Jonathan Sirois, Andrew Jean Baptiste. It was a completely different team. And I think for this iteration of Valor, I think it was, like you mentioned, the continuity of it, like the fact that they've built from 2024 to 2025, that there's some chemistry. This definitely feels like this could be a transformative result because, like you mentioned, it feels like something that could spark them on. So something to watch, I guess, because ultimately the worry was when you have such a high, it can be very easy to have a low. And I mean, I guess in a sense, the schedule makers have only tested them because they get Cavalry away next, but maybe that's what they need, another tough test to show that wasn't a fluke, that this is what they can do when they commit to it and play their game.
And we'll jump into our Canadians abroad section as well. Last week, we speculated that Tajon Buchanan's future might be a little bit gray. There were reports that he wasn't going to be staying with Villarreal and would go back to Inter Milan, and then questions around his future at that point with Denzel Dumfries still at Milan. But he goes on to score his first La Liga goal in a 3-2 win over Barcelona, who had already secured the league title. It doesn't get much better than that. Villarreal is going to the Champions League as well next season. Came out a bit of nowhere, but a 3-2 win for Villarreal, and Buchanan right at the center of that.
Yeah, I think it's a good result because, yes, you can argue Barcelona a bit hungover. They did win the title in midweek away to their rivals.
Literally or figuratively?
Definitely figuratively, because I mean, they have a lot of young guys in their squad. I don't know how heavy they were drinking, especially someone like Lamine Yamal, who's still just 17. But
it is Spain.
That's it. It is Spain. Granted, cultural differences as well. But I think that Barcelona, you could tell that they want to finish strongly. They put out a strong lineup. I think that, for me, is the biggest tell, that they didn't just, throw out a bunch of B-teamers and call it a year. And so the fact that Villarreal, despite that, went out and put in a top performance, get the win, and with Buchanan sealing it off, like, this is exactly what you want to see from a lone player, in the sense that, like we said, I think it was last week on the show, if he's not going to get this move to Villarreal, or at least for the price of the buy option, the best thing you can do is just either make it so that another team will look at you like, okay, like, let's get this guy in, or that Villarreal maybe reconsiders their position or tries to negotiate. And I think a goal like this can help, because his performances have been good. You can see he brings a bit of something different to that right wing. A lot of Villarreal fans have mentioned that, because the way that they play, it's a bit staggered. They got Alex Baena on the left, who's been one of the best creators in all of Europe this year, but he kind of tucks in and plays as a 10. They've lacked a bit of that vertical threat on the one side, and Buchanan's brought that. He's dribbling at guys. He's opening up space. And if you can, for him, the one thing we've talked about a lot is he's lost confidence in terms of goals and assists. So if he can get back to that, because he has it in his locker, that feels like the last step. So I thought it was very encouraging to see, and I think it's something that might boost him on, and perhaps maybe he'll lead to a big summer with Canada, which could also be another way for him to get his club future sorted.
Yeah, Jesse Marsh seemed quite pleased with Buchanan's performance and being able to spark on that big summer, and potentially a formative summer as well when it comes to his next step in club football. But a big day for Daniel Jebbison as well. He scored his first Premier League goal with Bournemouth and first Premier League goal since 2021 when he scored with Sheffield United, and made everybody excited as a young teenager being able to find the score sheet in the Premier League. But against Manchester City, 3-1 loss, but scoring against Manchester City is no easy feat, even in a year where Manchester City might not be the trophy-winning team that they have been in the past.
Yeah, well, they're still a Champions League team, right? They're a team that's pushing for that top 5 spot. For them, they're that good that an off year still means, being up at the top of the level. They got eliminated by Real Madrid in the Champions League too. It's not like they've had a disaster of a year by most standards. So credit to Jebbison. I think it was just a well-taken goal. And I think for Jebbison, the thing we've said a lot is it's just so good for his confidence, because we forget how chaotic the last few years have been for him in terms of the health issues, yo-yoing, even this first half of the year at Watford, where this guy didn't score a single goal in the championship with Watford over half a season. And he was playing like a decent amount. So for the fact that he's gone back to Bournemouth, they've rebuilt his confidence, scored a couple big FA Cup goals for them. Now he scores a Premier League goal. just shows the confidence is building again. And I think that's huge because he's a bright talent. I'll say it. But for him, consistency, just everything he's dealt with is held him back. And hopefully this can spark him on, and potentially maybe next year Bournemouth can look at him and really integrate him into their squad.
And Promise David had a little bit of a mini slump in Belgium, but he got back on the goals with scoring a header in a 4-0 win against Royal Antwerp as Union Saint-Gilloise sit one game from ending their 90-year title drought. Just have to match Club Brugge's final day result, and they play Ghent, who has lost 8 of 9 championship round games. Might be coming to the end of this confusing championship round of the Belgian league, but definitely a good weekend for Promise David as he gets back among the goals.
Yeah, well, I mean, it shows how good his season has been. That 4 games feels like an eternity. I guess it was almost 2-3 weeks, but just great score, a header. He kind of lost his spot even in the squad, had to fall back to the bench, but he comes off the bench, gets a goal, and hopefully he can get on the score sheet in this final game. Look, there's no guarantees, as we've learned in any level, any league. Ghent have been absolutely abysmal in the final round. Like, they've not just lost 8 of 9, but there's been like 4-0, 5-0, 3-0 blowouts. But they'll have some pride. They know that they want to finish strong. But for Union Saint-Gilloise, I think this would be a perfect way for them to end this drought with the commanding win. At home it is as well. So I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully David can finish off this season. And, with reports being out there that some teams in Europe are looking at him, there's some reports of, even Lille, you kind of almost feels like fantasy, like a joke to think, oh, Jonathan David's leaving. You're going to bring in the Canadian Promise David to replace him. But he's had that kind of season where teams like Lille could be interested in him, even if we don't know how true those reports are. I know he had a bit of fun on Instagram, laughing like, really, I've been linked to Lille? Funny guy Promise David is, actually, by the way, if you ever get a chance to interview him. So hopefully he can get this title over the line, because I think he'll have some fun things to say. And
Union Saint-Gilloise on Twitter also called him Air Toby. With such an elaborate name and so many fun names to go on, it seems a little bit underwhelming that his nickname is Toby, no?
Yeah, especially when you got Promise. I think there's just so much you could have gone for. But maybe someone smarter than us can find a fun nickname that relates, Promise and just the way he can score with his left is right. And as you saw, if you get a chance, like again with Promise David, all his goals are just so fun. Like, he got the one where he's getting dragged like a sled. And now he's got this one where he almost broke the net with his header. Like, it's a fun just whoosh. And sometimes you don't see that a lot from players.
I mean, he can finish with his right, his left, his head. Royal Union Saint-Gilloise, anybody who remembers a Brian White tweet from, I think, 2022, you can go look that one up. But Kyle Larin also scoring in La Liga. Mallorca lost to Getafe. He gets another La Liga goal. It's been few and far between for him with Mallorca, but good to see him hit the back of the net.
Yeah, always just a bit of confidence ahead of this summer. And as we've mentioned on the show, this could be an interesting summer in the sense that maybe he looks at his options ahead of a World Cup year, or he sticks around at Mallorca. No bad choice. And but definitely feels like a big summer's ahead. Guys are knocking on the door. I think he's going to need to get some goals at the Gold Cup if he wants to start thinking about keeping that World Cup starting spot.
Yeah, he'll be on the roster, no doubt, for the World Cup. And in further thinking to our episode yesterday, I think this is why we saw some of those, 2022 era names come back into the picture as well. I would imagine there's, Lucas Cavallini hitting up Jesse Marsch. Hey, what's up? Like, I'd like to play at the World Cup next year, right? That's probably what's going on with those names. But I don't think that, a guy like Lucas Cavallini is going to get back into the situation when you have all the strikers that Canada does. And Kyle Larin, of course, just barely holding on to that starting role as well alongside Jonathan David. But Moyes Bombido helped Nice secure Champions League football. And of course, he's going to have wrist surgery in a 6-0 curb stomping win over Brest. A good season from Moyes Bombido all in total. And unfortunate that he's going to miss the Gold Cup.
Yeah, I think this was about a dream of a season, as you could have expected. Like, the fact that he went from an MLS team like Colorado straight to a top 5 league, right? Like, there was no stepping stone, say like a Buchanan who went to Belgium and then made his way to Inter. He stepped right into Nice, helped them secure Champions League football for the first time since, I think it was 2019 it is. So this is not like he joined a club who's been doing that regularly. Of course, they have to play qualifiers, which, of course, played into the decision of him missing this summer as well, given that he's going to have a shorter offseason, but man, he was excellent. He played well, integrated quickly, got to learn from some legends like Dante, but also step in and replace a guy like Todibo. It really feels like the future is bright for Moyes Bombido. You remember how young he still is for a center back. I do wonder if there's a future that I think he's going to stay at Nice now that they secured Champions League football. Not that it was really ever in doubt, but I say that because if he has another year like this in the Champions League where people are going to be watching him, he goes and has a good World Cup where he's set up to do that with Canada with how they play. I genuinely think that the next step for him will be clubs like you're talking the Manchester Cities, the Arsenals, the Real Madrids, the Barcelonas, the Bayerns of the world. So hopefully he can continue on that trajectory, because I think it would be exceptional to imagine a guy like Bombido making a jump like that.
Yeah, you go from Liga in Quebec and CS Saint Laurent all the way up to the Champions League, and then potentially one of the big clubs as well. But we'll stay in Quebec as well. Ishmael Kone scored an absolute thunderfuck of a goal against Stade Rennais against Marseille. Nice little write up there by Alex in the script here. As he got to play his parent club, he also gave away a penalty and they lost the game, but who cares, because that was just a stupendous strike that made its way across Canadian soccer Twitter as well.
I love that you read it for verbatim, but I get like there's no other way to describe the goal.
I mean, that's what I thought when I saw it. Like,
it's like he just closed his eyes and looked at the sky and swore. He's like, "Deserve me, this one's for you," and just spanked it. And I just love how it went in that way. Look, I know Marseille fans, they're a special bunch, and there are a few in my mentions, correctly, man, like Rennes lost, etc. Kone, they got the last laugh, great. But I think for Kone, who cares from that perspective? Because again, it's been a tough year for the kid. Like, he makes a move to a big club, and then he deals with misfortune of the injury and just the struggles of integrating into such a intense club with rabid fans. And I just like that instead of letting that beat him down, he picks himself up, goes to Rennes, really finds himself again. He's really enjoyed playing with the smile. It means a lot to see him score and smile and celebrate against his parent club, because it's just been that kind of year for him. So even though that maybe might burn any bridges of him returning, not that I don't think he was any likely, I just love what it means for him, and hopefully he can stay at Rennes. They're a great development club, and I think we've seen the impacts they've had on Kone in just a short few months, where he's starting to look like himself again on the ball.
And over stateside, Tananiel OToole had a goal and an assist in a Minnesota win against St. Louis. And Jason Russell-Rowe also had a goal for the Columbus Crew against CF Montreal. OToole getting the better of the St. Louis side that looks absolutely dreadful. I thought Olaf Melberg could have been a good appointment for the Whitecaps at one point, but he's been, dire at St. Louis. But Tananiel OToole stays in form, his 6th goal of the season for Minnesota. And you've got to be liking that. But as I said on our other show, I don't think his strengths this season necessarily play into the Canadian men's national team.
Yeah, although the one, I guess, thing, he also has 5 assists, which I think is a good sign that he's showing, growth in his playmaking and how he's linking.
He's not, though, I don't think. I think when Minnesota scores, it is him and Kelvin Yeboah or Robin Ludd breaking quickly, and it's that last touch for the, empty net finish. And that's his assists for the most part.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's good creativity. There's good decision-making where I agree. Again, that's creativity. The hold-up play where he's not getting as many touches. He's not getting as much link-up play. That is, a worry. And I think that's the one limiting factor of this Minnesota team, that they just play such conservative, low-event football that I think it just might come back to hurt them in bigger games against bigger teams. I think the Whitecaps going there and kind of dismantling them a couple weeks ago, or I guess a month ago it would have been now, shows that. But I think for OToole, there's a flip side to it, because I agree with what you said yesterday about the adjustment to playing in the Canadian fold, where maybe he might be asked to do something different. At the same time, you do always have to admire strikers who get their goals, get their assists when they're getting little touches, because it does show good decision making. Sometimes in football, you're going to play teams where you might only get 10, 15 touches. If you're dangerous with those touches, that's good. So definitely something to watch for Canada. Hopefully he can step in and put what's going on at Minnesota behind him. But it's been a good start for him. Jason Russell-Rowe also tough that he's not able to make the squad, because I continue to really like what I'm seeing out of Jason Russell-Rowe. Of course, it helps Columbus. They play fun football, and he actually gets touches and he gets involved and scores goals. And he's just not been able to find room in this Canadian team because it is so jam-packed up front.
Yeah, last I checked, FBref, while writing a piece on what's going wrong for Inter Miami, but Columbus were averaging about 53% possession a game through this season, and Minnesota about 30. They do not touch the ball throughout the game, and the fact that they managed to completely dismantle Miami a few weeks back is just, incredible considering they barely had any of the ball. They had 20% possession that day and won 4-1 against Miami. Just absolutely crazy stuff that Eric Ramsey is doing without the ball with Minnesota. But we'll jump into our women's Canucks abroad as well. Vanessa Gil won the French League title with Lyon for the third straight season and then quickly signed with Bayern Munich just days later. And Bayern Munich, definitely the club to watch on both the men's and women's sides for Canadian soccer fans now, with Gilles now on the women's side and, of course, Alphonso Davies on the men's side.
Yeah, big move for Gilles in the sense that, of course, leaving a club like Lyon is always tough because that's pretty much like, other than Barcelona, like it's Lyon, it's Chelsea. I guess those are kind of the big ones in the world football at the moment. And of course, 5 years ago, Lyon was what Barcelona is now, and they still are, in that mix. Just this Barcelona team's hit a new level. But I think for Gilles, you just saw how she developed over her 3 years. Like, she was already very good when she went there from Angel City. Like, she had a great half season with NWSL. And man, what was it, 22 now? I remember when she scored that first goal. But like, she's just hit another level. Her ball playing, the way she dominates games, what she can do in both boxes. So I'm excited to see her go at Bayern, because I think the thing is that Lyon, which is the challenge, is that Wendy Renard still remains such a fixture. There's other big players. Gilles kind of got used to playing a bit of a supporting role with the team like that. No problem. But now at Bayern, like she has for Canada, I must point out, she's going to get a lead, that back line, and that can be good for her development. So exciting to see. Maybe she can help Bayern make a bit of a resurgence, because there's been some big signings in German women's football over the last few years, and Bayern as well have been very aggressive, and I think Gilles the latest of that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see whether Bayern can kind of enter that same, echelon of the Chelseas, the Lyons and the Barcelonas in women's soccer, because they haven't quite been there, but they still win Frauen Bundesligas quite regularly. They're well in the lead, and I think have secured the title this season as well. That it shouldn't be an issue to continue playing at that high level, but I do think that Vanessa Gilles can probably, continue to help them rise in women's soccer and potentially, win a Champions League and continue to play with some of those top teams in the European women's soccer. Ashley Lawrence and Chelsea and Kadisha Buchanan helped defeat Manchester United as well. Jade Riviere and Simi Wujo, of course, on that team in the FA Cup final to secure a domestic treble in England as well. And it looked like a fun atmosphere for the Chelsea players. Those celebrations have been across social media. And then Simi Wujo this week is playing in a 7-a-side tournament. Not quite sure what's going on there, but I saw a highlight going around on Twitter.
Yeah, a little fitness before the Canadian camp, I guess, at the end of this month. But no, on one hand, I guess bittersweet for Lawrence. She didn't feature in this FA Cup final. And, it's been bouncing in and out of the squad. Of course, Lucy Bronze coming to Chelsea didn't help in terms of the fullback position. But again, it just shows how dominant this Chelsea side is, where it feels like they almost had a bit of a down year, especially with how the Champions League run ended. I thought that was a very sour taste, just getting kind of dismantled by Barcelona, not really being in it as close as they would have hoped. But if your bad year is you're winning 3 trophies, I think that shows where you're at as a club. And it's going to be fascinating to see what next year looks like, especially what Kadisha Buchanan's recovery looks like. I think they did miss her in certain big games, given her pedigree and what she can bring. And we'll see what happens with Ashley Lawrence, if she can carve out a slightly bigger role. She had some good moments for Chelsea this year, but ended up being a bit more of a rotational piece than maybe expected.
And Mary Yasmin Alidou also had an assist in a 4-1 win against the Houston Dash. Her and Jessie Fleming will now look to help the Portland Thorns to lift the first ever W Champions Cup, with the semifinals resuming this week. They weren't able to get a result in that match, but it feels like a long time since this tournament started, and then a long time off before the semifinals got underway in Mexico.
It's funny to think that we were at that tournament in, what was it, August, September? We got to see the Thorns take on the Whitecaps Academy at the time before, of course, they rebranded as the Rise. It was the women's elite team. But yeah, tough for the Thorns. They took on Tigres, and Tigres got the better of them with just a clinical performance. Sets up a final between Gotham and Tigres. Would have been nice to maybe see Canadians involved in lifting the first ever Women's Champions Cup final, but no, good for Aladou that she's been getting minutes, getting goal contributions, and fitting in quite quickly into this Portland team. Jessie Fleming's kind of been in and out the team. She's had some really good performances, but then I think she's been battling some knocks as well. So hopefully this doesn't beat them down too much and they can get back on track. So they've actually had a decent start to the league season, even if it's maybe not been at the standards. Like, they're not in that Orlando, KC kind of spirit group, but they're right behind them in a playoff spot comfortably.
And in MLS, Vancouver is limping towards the CONCACAF Champions Cup final. A 0-0 draw against Austin FC, and then, of course, they go tie Valour 2-2 in midweek action in the Canadian Championship. But it's 3 straight draws now for the Whitecaps. They've still got a few more games. I think it's 2 more games until they take on the Champions Cup final. But it's definitely not the highest of highs they were at a few weeks ago when they were dismantling Messi's Miami.
One thing to watch, though, is they did struggle with their rhythm. I think that was the big thing that stood out, is they were playing every 3 days and thriving. All of a sudden, like, you see that sometimes, right? When your body has a heavy load, you kind of get used to it. But then as soon as you take a break, you realize how grueling it was. I feel like the Whitecaps are going through that right now, like just going to those longer breaks, a bit of lethargic start against LAFC. Now it's a bit of a frustrating one against Austin. On the flip side, it'll be interesting because Cruz Azul, of course, they lost in the semifinals of the Mexican final. So they get 2 weeks between their last game, which is this past Sunday, to that Sunday. So it's going to be a fascinating comparison because MLS didn't reschedule the Whitecaps next week against Minnesota because of theirs. So they're going to play Saturday, Wednesday, Sunday in the final. They've been great with those games all year. Cruz Azul get some rest. I think it's going to be a good theory of for tired teams, is getting back into that rhythm help them, or will Cruz Azul get the advantage because they have that extra rest?
And of course, the big match of the weekend was the Canadian Classique as well. Didn't quite go the way that CF Montreal would have wanted. 6-1 for Toronto FC. I went with my girlfriend to TFC versus Cincinnati earlier in the week, and that was a 1-0 win for Cincinnati. She's been to 2 games and she hasn't seen a goal. She wasn't looking when Kevin Denke scored against Toronto, so she doesn't quite believe that goals exist in soccer. She's not the biggest soccer fan and is just getting into it. But, no problem goal scoring for Toronto against Montreal, 6-1.
Yeah, I should have taken her to that game. I mean, granted, a little of a trek out to Stade Saputo for that one. But, yeah, tough times for Montreal because I think on one hand, it's a result that in isolation, it's not bad, right? Like, ultimately, Montreal doesn't have much to play with in MLS right now. Also, with this doesn't mean that much just with how the format works. Plus, they did beat Toronto in the game that mattered more. At the same time, you're at home. Your fans are already frustrated. It's been a tough start to the year. Losing a 6-1 in a derby is just unacceptable. Like, it's you can't accept that at any level, no matter how bad of a season you're having. You always show up and play with pride in a derby. And the fact they got absolutely spanked. Yes, they didn't help themselves with the early red card. And they also rotated their squad, which, again, shows you where Montreal's at, where they're rotating their squad for an MLS game and you don't even get the result in midweek in CanChamp. It's frustrating times for the Montreal fans, and I can't blame them for being quite angry because it's tough because where to even go from here, in the sense that, like, you look at the roster and it's just not equipped to compete at a level that they want to, and it just seems to be bleeding into different areas of the club and frustration. At the same time, they are playing a lot of promising youngsters. They are, they have committed to that model, but it's just tough from the fans. I think of the fans really in this circumstance.
Yeah, maybe Toronto needed something as a bit of an appetizer, 6-1 appetizer to hold them off of the 6-1 disappointment that came later that weekend. Of course, the Maple Leafs losing 6-1 in Game 7 against the Florida Panthers. But that also threw in a bit of concern about, this Toronto FC rebuild, because I cannot imagine that Toronto FC, as bad as they are, as disorganized as the organization seems to be at this point, is on the top of Keith Pelly's priority list at MLSE when the Maple Leafs continue to flame out in the second round.
Yeah, definitely going to be a big summer ahead for both teams. And heck, even you could extend that to the Raptors in a bit of a weird rebuilding phase where they themselves want to take some steps forward and build around their young stars. It's funny that all three teams are in such weird stages and different stages. But for Toronto FC, I think for them, they just need to try and build some coherent momentum. I think a lot of this has been stop-start. Like we spoke about it after the Insigne goal and, you know, his whole victory lap. We said, go and be consistent. What happened? They went and lost to Cincinnati and he didn't really do much, but then you get a huge win. I think now go and build off it. Just build off it, because I think for TFC, as we've mentioned, this fix is going to take a long time. So all you can do now in the short term is at least build some good vibes, you know, build some continuity from game to game. And that has been what's eluded them, because they'll have a game like this, a 6-1, and who knows, maybe they lose 3-0 on the weekend and that just kind of good feeling evaporates, right?
Yeah, it is 2 wins in 3 now, so you get a little bit of consistency there. If you stretch that out to 3 wins in 5, then you can have a little bit of consistency within that realm, and you're probably not pushing the playoffs, but you can stay in that conversation for a little bit longer. Of course, it's not completely out of reach for Toronto yet. It's probably out of reach for Montreal and LA. But we'll jump into the Northern Super League as well. Ottawa Rapid with a 3-0 win over the Vancouver Rise on the weekend. Halifax Tides falling 1-0 to AFC Toronto, and the Calgary Wild beating the Montreal Roses 1-0 at home as well. The Vancouver Rise also beating the Halifax Tides 2-1 in one of these rare coastal clashes as well at Swangard last night. I know you were hoping to be there, but we're out in Langley at the Canadian Championship match.
Yeah, and I think it was needed for the Rise as well. They go down a goal in that game and pull one back. So it was definitely a bit of a frustrating result away to Ottawa. It's been one of the sneaky surprises, so to speak, at least in terms of how well they've performed. I think we've expected what we've expected from the Roses. Although credit to the Wild for getting a big win against them and completely shaking up the table. I think before this midweek Rise Tides game, there was 3 points between first and fifth because of just how tight things have been. Credit to the Wild, credit to Ottawa. For Halifax, it's been a bit of a tougher start. I think this Vancouver one will hurt the most because Vancouver is kind of there for the taking. You go up 1-0 on the road, but then 2 goals sinks you. But it's been a very competitive start to the season, and I think we're starting to see some trends shape up now as teams start to face each other for the second time.
Yeah, it's certainly coming along, and it's definitely weird to see the Women's Champions Cup on at the same time as the NSL, because we were so far in front of or far before the NSL when the Women's Champions Cup was starting and the Whitecaps were playing. Some of the players are on youth developmental contracts in the NSL now, and it's like, oh, they already scored in the Champions Cup, and that's a little bit odd, in a sense. Of course, DeFilippo and several of the Vancouver Rise players were on that team as well, but it is a little bit, mind-bending in terms of how the time is all played out there. But a big week in Canadian soccer. Of course, the European season starting to wrap up, and we'll move on to the national team summers, and of course the Canadian Shield and the Gold Cup and the women's national team friendlies, which you can hear about on episode 231. But that's all we've got for episode 232 on the Northern Fútbol Podcast. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube at the 90th minute. We'll be back next time. Thanks so much for tuning in.